Powell, and I'm privileged to be serving as president of the Johann Fust Library Foundation Board. On behalf of our board and our foundation staff, I am thrilled to welcome you back to the courtyard and loggia for our 2025-26 season. It is especially wonderful to have all of you here in the month of November. Last year, Hurricanes Helene and Milton had other plans for our library and buildings and gardens. In this 25-26 season, we will be celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Johann Fust Library. For 3/4 of a century, the foundation has had the honor and privilege of fulfilling our mission to maintain and preserve the buildings and gardens while providing a literary and cultural center for the residents and visitors of Boca Grande. The foundation owns the library grounds, gardens, and buildings, as well as a fine collection of historical artifacts, photographs, and books. Throughout the season, we will be sharing with you our 75 years of history through those stories and pictures in our archives. Our speaker today was scheduled to be with us last November. Fortunately, he was able to reschedule and is here with us today, and it seems more appropriate as we celebrate our 75 years. For 13 years, he served as the 10th Archivist of the United States at the National Archives and Records Administration, commonly referred to as NARA. He was trained as a librarian, and before he went to NARA, was the director of the New York Public Libraries, which is where he met my fellow board member, Linda Fairstein, who will introduce and be in conversation with him today. As we kick off our 75th anniversary year, I want to thank all of you for your continual and loyal support for our foundation's mission. Thanks to you, our buildings are in very good shape. Our gardens have never looked more beautiful. And today, we present to you right here in the courtyard the first of our 8 free programs we will have this 25-26 season. So Linda, you ready to kick us off?
Ready to go. Okay, thanks, Kathy. Thank you, Cappy, and for everything you do for this library. And I join you in welcoming David back to the island, actually, which I'll check on about in a minute. We have a wonderful library foundation, wonderful board, very loyal guests. We boast ourselves of many dignitaries on this island, former presidents, first ladies, presidential chiefs of staff, cabinet members, but we've never had a national archivist before. So we thank you for joining that list of dignitaries. Of course, it's a personal pleasure for me to welcome you, a friendship that was born in another great library almost 18 years ago. A very happy thing. Would you tell us first what brought you to this island for a day trip in 2017, what you were doing here?
Sure. First of all, it's nice to be back, and I'm sorry about last year and thought of you and all of you who were left with all kinds of things to worry about and deal with for the following year. So it's nice to finally be here. I was here as the Archivist of the United States to meet with President and Mrs. Bush to present to them a candidate for the director of his presidential library. The presidential library, starting with Herbert Hoover, are under the jurisdiction of the National Archives. The directors of those are appointed by the National Archivist in a collaborative process that involves the family and foundation and the former presidents who are still around to participate. So I had the honor of having lunch with the Bushes and to present this candidate, which was a lot of fun. It was the day that the president's first book of paintings was, his first copies arrived at the house just before I arrived. So you can imagine what the lunch conversation was about. It was a great event, and they approved the candidate, and the candidate did a wonderful job. He was a great addition to the National Archives Presidential Library Director community. And just to follow up, to end the George Bush saga, the day before I left the National Archives, he telephoned me to wish me good luck and say goodbye, and gave me a wonderful piece of advice. You should take up painting.
I don't think you followed that advice, but
Not yet,
it was
not yet. I still have time. I still
Okay.
have time.
And as you know, I think Cappy said, we will be inaugurating our 75th anniversary of this very precious library. So it's quite appropriate that you studied and really spent most of your career as a librarian.
I did.
Would you take us back to your education and the reason you chose to become a librarian?
Sure. I was an undergraduate at Northeastern University in Boston, and I had a co-op assignment, a co-op advisor I was an education major, and my co-op advisor had a wonderful job for me at the MIT library shelving books. That was as close to education as she could come for a co-op job. And I was not at all interested, and I fought with her for some time. And fortunately, she won, because Nancy Caruso, who was the director, made the case for me to go over and meet with the folks in the libraries at MIT. I did, and I fell in love with libraries. I was a library person to begin with, but I had opportunities at MIT thanks to a couple of very strong women who kept an eye on me, knew they had a person who was curious and willing to take on new responsibilities. And so I progressed through just about every job there is in libraries during my 31 years in the libraries at MIT. I left there, started as I said, as a shelver in the humanities library, and left as the acting director. It took me 31 years to work through the system. And then, and in fact, thought I would be retiring from MIT, and got a call out of the blue.
I'm going to interrupt you. You
No,
never
yeah.
applied for a job from MIT. As you just said,
No.
you were going to retire
Yeah,
very
exactly.
happily.
Yeah.
And what call did
Just
you get?
at every point that I was getting, like, I've been here long enough, I need new challenges. Something would open up, some opportunity would be created, and I could move up in the organization. So I actually expected to retire there. I got a call out of the blue from Duke University saying that they were looking at me for university librarian, and would I come down to Durham. And I knew nothing about Duke at that point, and one of my biggest concerns was, having spent so much time in one institution, how easy is it to make that transition? And it became clear to me in the interview process that I knew the business, and there were wonderful opportunities at Duke in terms of fundraising and building a new building, and working in a different kind of research environment that I was interested in, and it became where I ended up. And I was very fortunate to work for Nan Cohen, who was the president of Duke, who had come from Wellesley to Duke just before I got there. And she saw the university librarian as a senior member of her leadership team. So I got to be involved in things that my peers did not get involved in, like campus master planning, curriculum reform, academic technology. They were great learning experiences for me, and great opportunities for me to get the library involved more in the life of the university. And I, there again, expected to be retiring from Duke University. I loved it, still love my 8 years at Duke. And got a call out of the blue one day from the New York Public Library saying that they were looking at me to become the director of the New York Public Libraries. It was the director of the research libraries was the job that they were looking at me for, the 4 great research libraries in New York. And as I told Nan, if it had been any other place in the world, I would not even have considered it because I love Duke so much. So I went and interviewed at the New York Public Library and was selected as the director of the research libraries. And within a year, we had gone through a reorganization, and I became the director of the New York Public Libraries. I inherited the 87 branch libraries. So overnight, I went from 4 to 91 libraries. New York Public is Manhattan, the Bronx, and Staten Island. And I remember standing at the map of the New York Public Libraries with my newly hired colleague who was hired as the director of the branch libraries, and the two of us standing looking at this map, and I turned to her and said, you know, this is worse than Starbucks. We've got a library in every corner. And that was how ignorant I was about New York Public Libraries, the public libraries part of the system, that each one of those libraries serves a very different clientele, different needs, different demographics. And so when we went through this reorganization and she moved on to other things, and I inherited the branches, my first job was to get into the branches and see exactly what the strengths and weaknesses were. And that was the biggest piece of my education in the New York system. One of the highlights of that time in New York, which 5 years as the New York director of the New York Public Libraries, one of the highlights of that time was getting to meet Linda Fairstein, who was working on a new novel. I got a call from one of the trustees, who's a close friend of hers, who had said that Linda wanted to cite a book in the New York Public Library, and would I talk to her, give her a tour. I didn't know Linda at all, wasn't familiar with her work, and I didn't agree to it until I had read all of Linda's books.
About 10 at that point.
Which I did, and I was just blown away by the level of research that this woman is capable of and has done for each of the books. And I learned so much about New York, where I was living, that she had written about, that I agreed to do it. And I gave her the most fantastic tour of the New York Public Library that I have ever done, because the theme was, where can I hide a body?
So I'm coming back to David because this is
gave
about
me a
David.
whole new perspective of, spaces in the public library.
So David had a board of 42 trustees, and really some very tough New Yorkers, personalities. Some of you know many of them. And I was very hesitant. I probably had a little too much scotch and said to my friend, a trustee, I use real sites in New York, the Museum of Natural History and Lincoln Center, and I'd love to get into the library because I'm a reader and I love libraries. Oh, she said, David Ferriero is brilliant, which he is. He is probably, we're in a land of a lot of good readers, the best read person any of us will ever meet. And she said, David will talk to you. So I figured that'd be 15 minutes, and then he'd pass me on to an intern. Together, we spent days. We went to the roof of the building for that perspective. We went 8 floors down into the stacks of the New York Public Library. We found out why there was a fireplace in the secretary's office of the library. And day after day, I'd go home and my husband would say, why are you going back to the library? And I said, because I'm seeing things that nobody gets to see, and because I have a crush on David Ferriero. Let's be honest. So it just developed, and he was my muse, and the book is dedicated to him, and I will forever be grateful to that. But no, thanks. That's too much about me. But
So where did you put the body?
They may have to read the book to find out, but there were a lot of suspects, and some of them were on the board, so little dicey, little dicey. But would you go back? I assume a lot of you know, but I assume many of you don't, that the great New York Public Library that's on Fifth Avenue, guarded by Patience and Fortitude, the two literary lions, that is just a research library. It is not a lending library. You can't go in and take a book out. Would you describe the four research libraries and
Sure.
what's so special about the NYPL? And then
Sure.
the branch libraries are where you go as you would go to the Lee County Library and ask Tony or Stacy for help finding a book.
So 4 great research libraries. This is the best library system, largest library system in the world. And the 4 research libraries are the Humanities and Social Sciences Library, which is now the Schwartzman Library on Fifth Avenue, the one with the lions. The Library for the Performing Arts at Lincoln Center, the Schomburg Library, Black Culture in Harlem, and the Science Industry and Business Library in the old B. Altman's building on Madison Avenue, which has now been closed and moved into the circulating library across the street on Fifth Avenue, which has now become the Niarchos Foundation Library. Everything's been renamed.
Right.
So those are the 4 great research libraries that I was first hired for.
And you were charged with everything, including finally the branch libraries.
Right, exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in your 5 years there, what are you proudest of having accomplished?
Oh, merging, creating one organization. It was really sad because it was really a kind of a social cultural merger. The branch libraries were treated, the branch staff was treated differently than the research staff for years and years. They were paid differently. They had different catalogs. There was not one unified catalog for the New York Public Library. The head of the branches and the head of the research library never talked to each other. They had offices in separate buildings. And I found out in my first week, I needed a book from the library across the street, and I walked into the building and went to the shelf to find the book myself, And by the time I got back into my office, half an hour later, I had an email from a friend in California who said, "I heard you were in a branch."
Crazy.
That's how bad the situation was between the branch and the research. And I hope by the time I left, we had a better system, better treated staff, and better appreciation for the important role that the branches play in the lives of individuals in New York. The large urban public libraries have a huge social responsibility, language acculturation, learning how to become a U.S. citizen, all kinds of social issues that you don't necessarily think of when you think of the library.
So you were fairly happy there. And
Fairly.
very busy.
I hated Christmas.
Right. Explain why. It was...
The Fifth Avenue on Christmas, if you've never been there, don't come. It's horrible. And living through it is worse.
It was bad. Okay. Well, other than that, and your 42, maybe 40 of your 42 trustees,
Yeah.
I believe it was a Friday afternoon.
It was.
When you received a phone call about another job.
Yeah, my assistant came into the office and said the White House is on the phone. So I picked up the phone, and this 12-year-old who was working on appointments for David Jacobson at the White House said, "We're looking at you." He said, "I'm calling from the White House." And I said, "Yes." And he said, this snotty kid said, "Aren't you surprised to be getting a call from the White House?"
This is 2009 under Obama's administration, right? And you said to him,
I said, what can I do for you?
And you remember his name, you know who he is?
Yes, Kyle Watkins. He's a nice kid. He's a nice grown-up adult now. He was an undergraduate at George Washington, working part-time for David Jacobson. Anyway, he said, we're looking at you for Archivist of the United States. And this was completely out of the blue. It's not something that had ever been on my radar screen. I had an impression of presidential appointees that the profile in my head was there's someone who has given a lot of money to a campaign, knows the president, and doesn't know anything about the business of the agency that they're being recruited for. So I turned him away. I said, I'm flattered, but you're looking at the wrong guy. And he said, well, would you think about it over the weekend, and we'll talk again next week. And he called again on Monday morning, and we had the same conversation. And 10 minutes later, I had a call from an adult who asked if he could come to New York and talk to me about the job. And that was someone from the foundation, National Archives Foundation board, who came to talk to me. And we had a great conversation about what they were looking for in the new archivist. They were very convinced that the National Archives had an important role to play in the President's Open Government Initiative, getting more participation and cooperation and collaboration in the government, across the government and across the nation, in involving the citizens in the work of the government. So it became interesting. I became interested in it, and it was a situation where I knew the business. It's not as if I didn't know what archives were all about, since I had been responsible for archives in all of my jobs at MIT, at Duke, and the New York Public Library. The archives reported to me. So I'm although not trained as an archivist, I certainly am familiar with archives. And the National Archives is actually museums, libraries, and archives. It's a combination of all three. So I went to Washington, met with the search committee, and apologized to Kyle Watkins and that I didn't take him seriously. And as I left the room, I was asked, can we consider you our candidate? And I said yes. And at that point, there was lockdown. I couldn't talk to anyone except my wife about what was going on. And the horrible, horrible, horrible vetting process started, with FBI agents spread out across the country asking questions, about me. And I kept getting email from folks wanting to know what was going on, because the FBI wasn't allowed to say anything except this is not a criminal investigation.
Two questions. Were any of your 9 predecessors, only 9 National Archivists in our history, were any of them librarians?
No.
And
did any of them know the business? No.
Now might be a good time for you to tell us what is the difference between a librarian and an archivist?
It depends on who you talk to.
Okay. We're talking to you.
There's has been a great deal of tension between librarians and archivists, similar to that tension I was talking about in branches and research, that the archivists have more responsibility. Mm-hmm. Their work is more complicated. Basically, both professions collect, protect, and encourage the use of, and fill in the blank. The blank is what changes. For archivists, it's unique material. But that's the same thing that librarians who work in special collections have the same sense of responsibility, because they're dealing with the same kind of unique materials. So that there really isn't, in my view, a difference between them.
Okay, good.
Processes are different for archival work, and those differences are blurring as more and more information is digitized. As more and more archival collections are digitized, all of those false processes have disappeared, it becomes much easier to find information. For instance, to give you an example, using the National Archives record-keeping process as an example, all of the records are cataloged, curated around the agency that created them. But if you are a researcher who is looking for information about how the federal government was involved in food in the United States, for instance, you have to go beyond the Department of Agriculture in order to find out, what's going on. You have to go to just about half of the federal agencies have some role in food, and you can't do that in the current organizational system, which is why digitization allows you to search across agency records, and that's the end goal of what we were trying to create in the National Archives.
I remember vaguely a story about you being on the train going to your confirmation and reading
Yeah.
about.
Oh my God, yeah. I was part of the vetting process is meeting with every member of the Senate committee, and you have a White House shepherd who accompanies you to meet these individual meetings. And I was on the train reading the Times article about the White House had just let an RFP for help in managing, archiving their social media. And I'm sitting there saying to myself, I'm not the archivist yet, but why on earth are we going outside the federal government for that kind of help? And what I discovered was, that was my first indication that the National Archives wasn't much involved in social media.
And one of your first, I'm skipping ahead because I'm going back to the vetting, but one of your first purchases, I believe, when you got to the archives was.
So I firmly believe and still believe and did at that point, even then, that if the role of the National Archives is to inform the agencies about proper record keeping, and with the knowledge that those agencies are using social media, why isn't the National Archives using social media itself and to learn what the problems are so that they can provide that intelligent guidance? That was where I was coming from. So I walk in to the job and discover a small group of staff are meeting in secret. These are folks who are interested in social media and have great ideas, but they're not allowed to officially meet. So I heard about this and walked into one of their meetings, and
weren't they thrilled?
They thought they were being busted, for meeting in secret. So we sat and talked for more than an hour about their ideas and things that they wanted to do. And I authorized them to buy 25 iPads in something else. I forget, early technology. This was 2009, late in 2009. So the next morning, and they were all excited. They were going to start experimenting. The next morning, I got a call from the then CIO saying, "I understand you want 25." Yeah, I said, "Yeah, isn't it exciting? We're going to be experimenting with social media." And she wasn't convinced. And she said, "Well, we don't support that technology." And I said, "Yeah, I know. That's the best part. They don't need support." That's what I said.
Good line. Okay. We'll come back to.
And the next call I got was from acquisitions, who said, "I understand you want." And I said, "Yeah, isn't it exciting? We're going to be experimenting." And he said, "That'll be 13 months. It'll take us 13 months to get that in-house." Yeah,
wow.
I said, "No, that's not good enough."
We'll come back to the importance of digitization, and I think maybe President Jefferson's views on copying things. But I'd like you to first talk to us about the National Archives. When were they established? By whom? How? And where are they housed?
There's a lot of interest from the very early days about in certain quarters about the records and how they were being kept and who's worrying about them. mainly among historians, as you might expect, who were trying to make sure that they could trace the history of the country. And so it really wasn't until historians beat up on FDR, who didn't really need to be beat up, but because he was really interested in records himself. It wasn't until his administration that the National Archives was created. It was in the building. So FDR had the job of hiring the first archivist and the first architect to create the building. And it was, as I said, after many years of people being worried about the records, starting with Thomas Jefferson. And I've got a couple of quotes that I want to read you that kind of put this in perspective. This is a letter from Thomas Jefferson that he wrote in 1789, and he said, this goes to the purpose of the National Archives. Why are we spending all this money, and why are we worrying about all of these pieces of paper? Wherever the people are well informed, they can be trusted with their own government, that whenever things get so far wrong as to attract their notice, they may be relied upon to set them to rights. So he said that in 1789. And then in 1791, he pinpointed one of the problems. Time and accident are committing daily havoc on the originals deposited in our public offices. The late war has done the work of centuries in this business. The lost cannot be recovered, but let us save what remains, not by vaults and locks which fence them from the public eye and use, and consigning them to the waste of time, but by such multiplication of copies as shall place them beyond the reach of accident. So I use that beyond the reach of accident, multiplication of copies, as my defense of the digitization. We want multiple copies of this stuff so that people can get at them, because as FDR pointed out in the dedication of his presidential library in Hyde Park in 1941, he likened the dedication of the library to an act of faith, to bring together the records of the past and to house them in buildings where they will be preserved for the use of men and women in the future. A nation must believe in three things. It must believe in the past, it must believe in the future, it must, above all, believe in the capacity of its own people to learn from the past that they can gain in judgment in creating their own future. So from the very beginning, the intent was, these records are for you. These are for you to hold the government accountable and to learn, for all of us to learn from our past. That's what it's all about.
And who has access?
Everyone.
Okay.
Everyone.
And you've made it much more possible, you, David Ferriero, for everyone under your watch to have access without having to go to the building in D.C.
But we're talking about 15 billion pieces of paper.
Give us the numbers, because they're staggering. The paper, the photographs.
15 billion pieces of paper, 43 million photographs, miles and miles of film and video, and billions of electronic records. So we put a stake in the ground about digitizing everything in the collection, and they're chipping away at that. It'll be forever. We had two public meetings. I hosted two public meetings in Washington when we announced that we were digitizing everything, to get some sense from the American public about what are you most interested in, where should we start, and what's on your wish list for having access. And so I hosted the meetings in Washington, full auditorium, both had the same result. The things that people were most interested in, two things: Kennedy assassination, UFOs. Those are the two things that people are most interested in. So you historians, I apologize. That's not what we decided to focus on. But But I am pleased that we did discover on the UFO front that in 1970, the Air Force contracted with a Canadian firm to build a flying saucer. We built a flying saucer ourselves. And in the test, we have the records of the test, it raised up about 40 feet off the ground and crashed.
Okay. Would you tell us, in addition to, and if you go to the National Archives site, where there's so much fascinating information, there are all these numbers of billions of documents and items and photographs. It's mind-boggling. What else were your duties? Talk about, if you would, the presidential libraries. Please.
The most complicated, I think, of all of the pieces of the job, for me anyway, were the presidential libraries. And these were, it's an interesting combination of the federal government, a private foundation, and I often say the damn family, but I can't say that in public because I got some foundation folks here. Maintaining that relationship among those people, even within families, occupied a lot of my time. And the ones that really work and really work at it pay attention to those pieces, and shouldn't the federal government shouldn't be involved.
Right. Well, how many presidential libraries are there? How many?
15.
Okay, and how many came to be under your watch?
3.
Tell us which.
W. It was. I was not the archivist when it was launched, but I was it was turned over to me. So the way the presidential library system used to work, a private foundation is established sometime usually in the middle of the first administration that start thinking about a presidential library. So a private foundation is established to start raising money for the foundation, for the creation of the library. And then the library is built to specifications developed by the National Archives to ensure the environmental conditions and everything are appropriate. And then at the ribbon cutting ceremony, it becomes property of the National Archives. It becomes government property at that point. But the records and artifacts are from the beginning government property. So they belong to the National Archives as the government entity for the information. So I received, as the archivist, I received the W Library in Dallas. The next library was Obama. Yeah. I inherited a study that had been commissioned for Congress just before I got there about the future of presidential libraries because of the cost involved. So when the library gets assumed as part of the National Archives, it comes with a tax to the foundation of support. And that tax is established by the outgoing president. So the W's tax on the Obama was like almost 60% of the operating cost. But that study that was done laid out the seriousness of the problem of funding for presidential libraries. And if you go out like 20 years, at the moment I was there, it was like 25% of the total budget was presidential libraries. When you go out to 25 years, it's almost 75% of it is presidential libraries, and it's impossible to maintain. So the new model, which we started with Obama, and it's complicated by the fact that most of the records now are being created electronically. They're not being created in paper. For Obama, for instance, about 95% of the records were born digital, no paper equivalent. So why are we building a library to house paper when when it's all digital? So the new model is, and what is being developed for the launch of the Obama Presidential Library. The Obama Presidential Library is already up. It's all digital. It will, as the material is processed, more and more of it will be added to this online. What's being built in Chicago is a presidential center, which will have a museum and a policy center, and that's the model going forward.
Got it.
So you can actually now go to online to the National Archives, and you'll find sites for the Obama Presidential Library and for the Trump first-term Presidential Library also.
What are the citizen archives, and whose idea were they?
So on his first day in office, President Obama met with his senior staff and made the comment that the government doesn't have all the answers, and this is part of that open government plan I was talking about. The government doesn't have all the answers, and we need to think of ways of engaging the American public in the work that we're doing. So when I came on board and learned that, read that, I started talking to my staff about, well, what can we do? What is it that we can involve the great unwashed in helping us do our work?
That's us, folks. Okay.
And we created, like the citizen scientist effort, the citizen archivist program, which gives you opportunities to help us. And we started with one of my pet projects having to do with the cursive problem. About 80% of our records are in cursive, and we've got a couple of generations of kids who can't read our records.
No longer taught. Cursive's no longer taught in most
It's coming back
schools.
slowly. It's coming back, but it's a huge problem.
So what
So
did you do?
we've got thousands of records that in cursive that have been loaded onto the Citizen Archivist site, and people from all over the world now actually are helping us transcribe and add to our corpus transcribed copies of these records, which is really exciting.
Very.
Yep. We've also got, as I said, 43 million photographs. They have not been described as thoroughly as they might be, so we've loaded lots of photographs also, and people are helping us identify individuals and places in the photographs. So there are several different. I encourage you, when you can't sleep, log on to archives.gov and check out Citizen Archivist program and see what you can do to help us.
It's great program. Two things that I had no idea the archives played a role in, and others may not. The Electoral College and the constitutional amendment. So would you just tell us about that?
Things they don't tell you during the interview. So the National Archives has the administrative responsibility for managing the amendment process and for the Electoral College. So on the Electoral College side, a letter from the Archivist of the United States goes out to the state attorney generals and the District of Columbia to establish the date of the Electoral College and to certify the individuals who are voting in the states. And all of that information is coordinated for the delivery of the final vote in the states, which comes directed to the National Archive, to the Archivist of the United States. And it's collated and matched against the original list of electors, which was sent in advance, which has become problematic for the last couple of elections, to ensure that only the appropriate people are voting in the electoral process in the states. So the National Archives, so that ceremony that takes place, that infamous ceremony that takes place on the Hill on January 6th, or whatever date is chosen for that, is based on work that is done by the National Archives and delivered to the Hill. And just to clarify, for that particular year when that was so traumatic, the records, this is the least of the worries, but those records were not at risk because they were only a copy of the multiple copies
Thank you.
that never get, never leave the custody of the archives. Same kind of process works on the amendment side, that the same kind of communication with the state secretaries of state to vote on the amendment is coordinated by the National Archives.
Wow. I have two more questions, one very light at the end before we open it up, but we talked during COVID, you and I, and it was overwhelming to me and stunning what you did during COVID. So you went every day to the National Archives, which is where in DC?
700 Pennsylvania Avenue, exactly halfway between the White House and the Hill.
And who else was in that building with you?
Security staff and an archivist whose job it was to ensure that the records were not at risk, like there were no leaks or things like that.
And security, we're talking about the fact that the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights are in that building.
That's right.
So it wasn't security for you.
Right? Oh, no, not at all. No.
It was security for those documents.
Yeah. I mean, the building wasn't open. There were no, you know.
Right. And there were no other employees there.
Right.
And at your
Exactly.
other buildings.
That's right. 42 facilities in 17 states.
So what did you do about communicating with these thousands of employees?
One of the early things that we did in order to improve communication, as you might understand, 3,000 people spread out across the country, getting the message out to them and giving them a sense of this is one organization. We early on addressed that by creating an internal communication network, so we had regular ways of communicating with the staff. So I met with the entire staff every week and tried to reassure, give them as much information as I could about what we knew, what direction we were getting from the White House, about reopening or closing or its current status of COVID. And then I was in my military career trained as a hospital corpsman psychiatric psych tech, and started thinking about talking to them about isolation and how to deal with being away from the job and all those kinds of psychological issues that COVID was imposing on the staff.
Did you learn anything from Martha Stewart?
I did, and came across a wonderful article in the New York Times about how Martha was spending COVID sequestered in her farm in Bedford with her gardener and a housekeeper. I think those are the only two people. So I was in hysterics reading this, and I read this to the staff, and they got a big charge out of that. And then I started thinking about people in libraries and museums and archives are foodies. They love to cook, and I do too. And I collect cookbooks. And I said to this archivist, we could do. I did before that. I did a tour. Many of the staff have never been to Washington, so I did a tour of the building. We had monumental statues outside. I took them outside and showed them all the statues and walked through the building and did the whole tour for the staff. And then I launched into this idea. I talked it over with the archivist who became my videographer. Let's do a cooking show. We'll do a cooking show. So 52 weeks of cooking. Every Thursday, we filmed on Tuesdays and we released it on Thursdays. And I was using a catering kitchen which had a refrigerator, a sink, and a microwave. That was it. So I lived 2 blocks from the archive, so I had to do a lot of prep the night before, then open microwave to pull out a complete dish. It became the most popular thing that we ever could have done. The families were gathering on Thursdays to watch this. It started this conversation among the staff, sharing recipes. And my favorite, a woman who works in St. Louis sent me an email saying she has an autistic son who likes to cook, and he's just fallen in love with the show.
Are copies available of the, oh, come on.
No.
My last question is, all correspondence, presidential correspondence, I believe, is in the archives. Is that
Yeah.
true? Did you ever do a search to see if there was any correspondence with David Ferriero?
I never did, no, but I can tell you, I had the strangest experience when I met with the directors of the presidential libraries for the first time. We were at the Carter Library, and the director of the Kennedy Library handed me a copy of a letter that a kid wrote to the president asking for information about the proposed Peace Corps. And it's a letter from me.
Okay. And how about the Eisenhower archive?
2 weeks later, the Eisenhower called to say they'd found 2 letters from me to President Eisenhower. And when I was at the LBJ, they handed me a copy of my letter to LBJ congratulating him for signing the Civil Rights Act.
So the system really works.
It really works.
It really works.
My staff was so sick of hearing about this that one day, staffer came, that same videographer came running in. We just found this letter that you wrote to President Taft. Taft had his summer home in Beverly, Massachusetts, where I grew up, and that's why they
picked that one. Well, thank you for getting as much in as you did and giving us so much information in such an accessible and delightful way. And I know Bobby's going to take the stage.
Am I working here? Maybe someone in our audience has a question. Julianne's over there with the microphone, and I'll be on this side.
What was the fireplace in that room in the library for?
Many of the Carnegie libraries, the older libraries that were built in New York, had superintendent suites. The superintendent actually lived in the building. And in the main building, I forget what his name was, but he raised 7 kids in the main building on Fifth Avenue. And the kids, there's a wonderful story about the kids playing baseball in the Rose main reading room.
Yes, which is gorgeous. You should see it. It's gorgeous.
Using the books for bases.
They would take the big, like, Audubon folios and make bases out of them. And after they had to be quiet while people were in the library, and at night they'd literally play baseball.
Yeah.
We found these facts together. It was just a gift.
Read Linda's book.
Yes, please.
That's right. You're right, Barbara. Thank you.
Any more questions?
I have one brief question. What are the implications of AI to
Yeah.
the archivists?
Great question.
It's scary. It's really scary, and I'm really concerned about it because of how easy it is. What I've seen is how easy it is to mistake misinformation as real information, and how easy it is to change. You know, whoever happens to have access to the technology. And I'm concerned about the intellectual property rights of the original creators of the material. I know that the Authors Guild and PEN and those folks are really concerned about that many of these services are now scooping up all of this copyrighted material illegally. And I find myself now, and I'm sure you do, looking at that stuff, questioning whether, is this real? In the old days, when we were trained as librarians, it was always, you never relied on one source. You always went to multiple sources. And I'm back to that now, whenever I'm doing searching myself. Is this really true? It's scary. But over time, librarians have always played the role of educating the public about how to use technology and how to judge whether something is trustworthy or not. And this is an opportunity for librarians to step up and tackle this one also. So I have great faith in that.
You have such great source material.
Yeah.
Is there any way that, using my imagination, that you can, quote, at least certify or some form of being able to, before it is manipulated by some of the AI people that do nefarious things?
Yeah, I don't know that. I don't know that. It's just so easy to replicate and so easy to change. It's something that has always bothered me about this shift from paper to electronic record keeping. That how can we guarantee that this is going to be available 100 years from now the way we can guarantee mostly that paper is available?
Now, Linda, I know I promised you it wasn't going to rain, but if you notice the migration,
Oh, no.
that's what's going on out there.
Thank
I
you
just
for
wanted
all-
to let you know, it's not an exodus.
We held it off till, thank you.
Do we have another question over there?
Gentleman.
Yeah, I have a question, and it follows up what you were just saying about preservation of the digital records. And you have paper being digitalized for access online. What if we lost our electrical grids and,
Yeah.
now you can't get at, do you have any backup systems or ideas, or is it just like, apocalyptic scariness?
We're heavily on the federal government, along with a lot of entities, are heavily dependent upon the cloud and backup in the cloud. But you're right. It's all based on an ancient technology, electricity. Yeah.
This gentleman,
We have another one.
and then Julianne, the gentleman.
Hi. Does the position of Archivist of the United States currently exist in this administration? And if so, how is it different or the same from when you were last there?
The position still exists, and it's being held at the moment by Marco Rubio. He's the
He's a
acting
little busy.
Archivist of the United States.
Yeah. So, yeah.
What percentage of the materials have been digitalized?
Oh, a small percentage.
Small percentage.
Very small, yeah. There again, it's funding,
Well, did we have another?
One more
Another?
question? Yes.
What is your view of the future of physical libraries around the country? Are they growing? Is the use changing? Where do you think it's all going to end up?
I've been paying attention to this, especially I live in Durham, North Carolina, so I'm still close to a university, and am amazed at how popular paper still is among students. Students are still using books. Yeah, I know. I think there's always going to be a role for paper.
But aren't there uses too of the buildings? Like when we were in New York, the people coming in to use computers who don't have computers. I mean,
That was a problem. I'm not sure it's still as much as it used to be.
Before
stand
we
corrected.
close out the program and before I thank David and Linda, I did have a little announcement I wanted to make. So today, you're all going to get a copy of Island Book Notes. It's hot off the presses. And as you hold this year's issue in your hands, you'll see that on the cover are the pictures of the 15 presidents who presided over the Library Foundation over the last 75 years. And as we begin our 75th anniversary, it makes sense to honor the leaders who made sure that the Johann Fust legacy was shepherded through these 75 years. And so as you read your Island Book Notes, just remember, we've got 31 local writers featured in this publication. So I think you're all to be credited for supporting this beautiful foundation and the world of the library. And I want to thank Linda. Thank you so much, Linda. You're such a great interviewer. And we're so grateful that you introduced us to David. David, what a wealth of information you have. I'm sure people are going to want to pick your brain a little bit still. Thank you so much. It's been 2 years we've been waiting for you. And it's worth it. Well worth it.